Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Open Mind. Thank you so much for joining us for our first program of the fall 2022 season. I'm Vicki Goodman, and on behalf of the Friends of the Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior at UCLA and the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital Board of Advisors, I'm honored to introduce and welcome Andy Dunn, author of Burn Rate, Launching a Startup and Losing My Mind. In his unconventional and gripping story of mental illness and entrepreneurship, Andy Dunn, co-founder of the e-commerce-driven menswear startup Bonobos, opens up about his personal struggle with bipolar disorder and shines a light on the dark side of success. Andy, who is coming to us from his home in Chicago, challenges us to take part in the deepening conversation around creativity, performance, and mental health, which is exactly what we will be doing today. We are also honored to welcome back to the Open Mind Dr. Kay Redfield Jameson, who is one of Andy's heroes, as she is many of ours. Kay is joining us from her home in Baltimore. She is the Dalio Professor in Mood Disorders and Professor of Psychiatry at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. She's the author of 10 books, including her groundbreaking memoir, An Unquiet Mind, about the unfolding of her bipolar disorder while doing her training at UCLA. Dr. Jameson has written over 100 academic papers, was named one of the best doctors in the United States, and was chosen by Time as a hero of medicine. Also joining the conversation today from his office in beautiful Napa, California, is Brandon Staglin, president of the nonprofit organization One Mind. Brandon channels his deep experience in communications, advocacy, and his personal schizophrenia recovery to drive brain health research to save and heal lives. His best-known advocacy work has been for the growth of science-driven, large-scale prevention and early intervention services for youth facing psychiatric illness. We would like to thank all three of our distinguished presenters for taking the time from their busy schedules to share their personal experiences, insights, and knowledge with us. Now, before we get started, just a few housekeeping guidelines. Our program will run for approximately 1 hour, with the last 15 minutes reserved for your questions. If you would like to ask a question, we ask that you please type it into the Q&A, not the chat, located at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and we will do our best to get to as many questions as possible. Today's program is being recorded and will be available for viewing on our YouTube channel, which you can find on our website, friendsofthesemelinstitute.org. There you will also find a library of videos from past Open Mind programs, a calendar of upcoming events, information about the Friends Research Scholar Program, and our Open Mind Film Festival for high school students. For those of you with us for the first time, today's program is part of our free Open Mind community lecture and film series that brings together thought leaders in science and culture for meaningful and relevant discussions about mental health. As with public radio or television, if you feel our Open Mind programming provides an important public service, we hope you will consider supporting us by making a donation in any amount. Information is on our website. And now, please join me in giving a warm Zoom welcome to Andy Dunn, Dr. Kay Redfield Jameson, and Brandon Staglin. Thank you so much.
Hi, good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be here with all of you. I want to be really brief because we have such a wonderful group, including not one, but two heroes whose courage has come before mine in talking about mental illness, destigmatizing it, doing work, leading research, so many great things. So it's great to be here with you, Brandon and Kay. My story, for what little it's worth, is I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder type 1 when I was 20. I had a manic episode as a senior in college, a common story in terms of the time in my life. the usual stuff, messianic delusions, delusions of grandeur, elevated speech patterns, rapid cycling of moods, irritability. And over the course of about 3 or 4 nights, I became entirely psychotic and ended up at the hospital where my mom worked, no less. I spent a week there, came back to earth, thank God for great medication and great doctors. And upon discharge was diagnosed with bipolar disorder type 1. And it hit me like an absolute sledgehammer. Folks use the phrase, Andy is bipolar, which I think is akin to saying, someone is cancer. We equate the identity with the illness. And so I felt a personal stain on my character, on my humanity. I felt it was a deeply unspeakable shame. And what is shame if it's not what we can't speak about? And so I didn't. I spent 16 years in the closet with this illness, including with myself. And then it came roaring back after about a decade of alternating between depression and hypomania, and incidentally, hypomania being somewhat useful for the entrepreneurial pursuit, provided jet fuel for building something. Unfortunately, I was back and forth between a state of hypomania where I had a lot of other issues around alcoholism and promiscuity and poor judgment, but that was veiled under and cloaked really behind the entrepreneurial journey where we might expect people to show up that way, alternating with catatonic depression, suicidal ideation, and then culminating in 2016 with the second manic episode. At that point, I was 36. I was hospitalized at Bellevue for a week. I was a different person at that point in many ways. I had 600 employees. I had a wonderful girlfriend. I had a family who had all woken up to the issue. I'd raised over $100 million for my company. So I had a lot of responsibility and in theory, some more maturity. And I walked out of Bellevue, finally ready to deal with this, to be in therapy, to see a doctor, to take medication. And as I was discharged from Bellevue, I was greeted by NYPD. And I was arrested and charged with felony and misdemeanor assault. And so I will leave it there. That's the cliffhanger. The rest is in the book. And with all that, would love to welcome Brandon to the stage and Kay. And Kay, thank you so much for being the, in my opinion, original and foundational pioneer in this sort of memoir. And when I read your book, it was really the first time I confronted this illness. And so I'm so grateful to you 20 years later.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted you have that reaction. You've written a really interesting book, and I think a really important book. I'm curious what the reaction has been to it from friends, fellow business people, the public.
It's been like jumping into a wall of pillows. A remarkable, for me anyway, amount of acceptance and affirmation. I think in some sense, we're tired of hearing from people about their successes, let's say. And so I found that being vulnerable and disclosing really the dark side of the journey really invited a lot more people into the conversation. And of course, the outpouring from people who are dealing with mental health issues, who have loved ones who are dealing with issues, who have loved ones who've passed. I've gotten thousands of messages. And at one point I was up in the middle of the night and my wife was like, remember, you're not a mental health professional, you're a mental health patient. So I'm not sure it's, good to be trying to respond to all of these, but it's been incredible. And I guess, Kay, I would ask you what your experience was like, when your memoir was published, and if it was any different or similar.
I would say it was a lot more complicated than that. My major concerns were professional and personal loss of privacy, but professional in terms of licenses, hospital privileges, and so forth. And for the most part, I'd say my colleagues were terrific, certainly at Johns Hopkins. I had a lot of support of my department and hospital. It was more mixed among some other colleagues. Interestingly, I think people in medicine and surgery were more understanding in some ways than psychiatry. Now, this was a long time ago, but the response I got from the public generally was terrific and very heartening. But there are an awful lot of people out there who really are frightened and hate people with mental illness, at least at that time. And so I got thousands and thousands of letters, and quite a few of them were from religious fanatics, I would say, who thought that mental illness was caused by devils, and if I'd only prayed harder, I wouldn't have these problems, and so forth and so on. So it's been mixed. I think basically I can't complain, but it's as you know, it's not an easy thing to put your private life on paper.
Of course. Brandon, what about you when you came forward?
Yeah, thanks for asking. It took me a long time to be open about my mental illness, about my schizophrenia. The turning point for me came when I had the opportunity to talk to a film director that came to my family's vineyard here in Napa Valley to interview us about our nonprofit One Mind, and primarily about our winery. But we worked in One Mind into the conversation, and he wanted to know why we had founded One Mind in 1995 as a family. And up until then, I told nobody in the public about my schizophrenia, but this was an opportunity I recognized not to live in fear anymore. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to tell him. So I volunteered. It's because I was diagnosed with schizophrenia in 1990. And he didn't put that in the film, which was fine with me. But it was a turning point for me, knowing that I could be open about my mental illness. And the reaction that I got when I started to be more open with more people leading off of that about it was primarily curiosity. I was very matter of fact about my condition, about what I'd gone through, and people were just, well, so what was that like for you? Friends and family that I tell about it. And then when it became even more open, blogging about it and public speaking and webcasting about my experiences, about those of friends and colleagues who've gone through similar experiences, I developed a following, and that was gratifying via the blog, and gratifying primarily in that other people identified with what I was expressing, and they too could sense that recovery was possible through what I was sharing. So in general, it's been positive, and I feel very lucky to be in a job where I can be open about my condition and not fear repercussions. But I think that the way it's framed, the way I frame it, helps a lot, and people feeling comfortable talking with me about it.
So one of the issues that had come up was it's the relationship to creativity and entrepreneurship. And actually it's been studied a fair amount. And there's a kind of an overlap in some of the symptoms of hypomania and being adventurous, creative, breaking down barriers and so forth. And some of it is just risk-taking goes up hugely when people get manic or mildly manic. They get bold, they get adventurous, they want to go to the other side. They think they can do anything. Andy was talking about grandiosity, grandiose delusions. And on the one hand, in an extreme form, it's pathological and ill-serving. But in a milder form, that notion that you can do anything, you can create anything, there's nothing that holds you back, is an extraordinary both feeling, and I think enables people or emboldens people to go places they would not otherwise go. And interestingly, with mania, it's the only place where the diagnostic criterion of changes in behavior, spending behavior, is anywhere, in this huge Bible of diagnostic criteria in psychiatry. There's only one place where changes in economic behavior shows up, and that's in mania, because people spend more money, they spend it recklessly, they spend it with poor judgment, but sometimes they spend it fortunately. So I don't know what your experience was, Andy, in terms of when you're mildly manic versus obviously when you're manic, you weren't very functional, but.
No, I had one of those experiences right in the buildup towards my Bellevue hospitalization. I went into a store in Midtown Manhattan, one of these old antique spots that you probably have walked by but never been in. And I picked out a painting, and then I picked out a thrown chair, and then I picked out a wolf statue howling. We had a garden that was 8 square feet, so that barely fit. I picked out a rug, and all this stuff showed up at our home. And my wife just started crying because she couldn't understand what had happened. And this was a buildup, to the hospitalization. It was a $17,000 bill. I bought it all in like 12 minutes. I think the owner of the shop figured I was in a spendy mood. He gave me a beer and a cigarette. I don't even smoke. And I was sitting in this chair in the basement of Midtown Manhattan buying all this stuff. And then when I came out of the hospital, my mom said, let's go and try to return it. And this was not the kind of place with 365-day returns. So we went back and, luckily the guy took everything back except for this one painting. And I would swivel and show it to you. That's right over here, that my wife hated, but everyone else who came in the house loved. Anyway, I work it into the epilogue of the book, but Kay, what you're saying resonates a lot because I've had that direct experience with mania and spending.
Mm-hmm. I watched the film Touched with Fire that Paul Dalio directed and created several years ago, and which you were in, Dr. Jameson. Very impressed with that story. I think it's very complex and balanced in terms of his portrayal of the experience of people with bipolar. Correct me if you have a different opinion, but I did enjoy the story of the creativity that comes from mania. And I have friends who've experienced mania, and I've learned from them that they often enjoy that experience and don't want treatment to dull that. Do you experience that, Andy or Kay?
Kay, why don't you go first on?
Well, there's actually there are a lot of studies looking at creativity and bipolar illness, and they're really pretty consistent, showing a much elevated rate from single biographical studies of individual people to population studies of like hundreds of thousands of people showing an elevated rate. So I think it's one of those things that is studied. I from my own point of view, I'm reluctant to kind of add creativity to my name. I mean, but I think that from my point of view, I'm infinitely more productive, medicated. I mean, I would be dead or in a back ward somewhere. So I don't see anything attractive about mania anymore. I've been there, done that. I went through the phases of not taking my medication. So I just have no temptation not to study. And I think in this day and age, people have a lot more options. When I first started taking lithium, people were prescribed much higher doses. That's just the way medicine was at that time. And in this day and age, people are prescribed at much lower doses, and you can work together with your therapist or doctor to try and figure out the best solutions. I don't think it's quite so much either or, but certainly a very common response amongst the artists and writers is my creativity is going to be taken away from me until they get really, really depressed.
Do you think it's well-founded that, I mean, you talk about like lower doses being used today, and do you find that you retain your ability to think creatively with treatment?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think many people do. And I think if people feel like they can't, then you don't want to just quit. You want to figure out some way around it, some sort of solution together with your doctor. I don't think it's either or. I really do think in this day and age, there are options with medications and treatments.
Fantastic.
What about you?
I agree. My doctor likes to say, might we all be controllably hypomanic every day? Right? So be in that zone where you feel ebullient, where you have positivity, where you have some joie de vivre, but not with the danger of slipping upward, and not with the credit card debt of having to pay that down with depression and depressive episodes. So I'm also really grateful that tinkering in the medicine cabinet, for me, it took 2 years really after the second episode. The previous episode, I just went off my meds like a 20-year-old punk. I don't have this. This isn't me. I don't want to accept this. And I just I just rolled the dice. And the discharging psychiatrist said something almost fatal. She said, to my family, if Andy doesn't have another episode for 5 years, this may have been a one-off event. There, I'd been using psilocybin mushrooms, so there was a narrative that it was connected to that. Of course, it probably was intersectional in some way. And then nothing happened for 8 years. So we all clung like a life raft to that one sentence that psychiatrist had said on discharge, a one-off psychotic break. And then when it came back, of course, the stakes were so much higher. And I don't want to say, wiser, but certainly older. And I didn't want to let people down. I had been violent. I had been through the legal system. I put my loved ones through hell. And I had a girlfriend who, Manuel is now my wife, who I didn't want to lose. And she and her mom were really clear. They were the two individuals who I assaulted. They said, yeah, we're good with you as long as you take your meds and see a doctor. And so there was not the unconditional love, perhaps, that one's family provides, also the conditioned love of a new potential family. And so the second time, I was ready to walk through the woods for months and months to figure out what are the right dosages and what are the right medications and how do they work together. And of course, it had progressed quite a bit. So now I feel so lucky the quality of medication and the treatment. And the injustice, of course, is that it's hard to pay for, that the reimbursement rates are too low. It's hard to find the right person. And so we've got work to do societally to make that kind of care available to all.
Absolutely. And even if people can afford it, you're not always going to get somebody who knows what he or she is doing, unfortunately. For example, one-off psychotic episodes really don't happen very often, but I mean, I think you need to search and find somebody, but the healthcare system being what it is, being brutally unfair, it's easy to say, get a second opinion or look for a good doctor, but if you can't afford it.
And like you're saying, Kay, even if you can't afford it, there may not be doctors at all to see. The workforce is so taxed, and so such a shortage of people working in the field of serious mental illness care and mental health care in general, that needs to be addressed. I was at a conference earlier today for One Mind at Work, one of our divisions that deals with mental health in the workplace and helps companies to adopt best practices and supportive culture and empowering culture for employees with mental health challenges. And one of the topics that we raised there was, what do you do for employees who are experiencing serious mental illness? And one of the panelists of whom I asked this question said that they try and identify those who are in crisis using best practices, instruments and things, and being aware, but then they refer them to care with their benefit plan. My question to them was, then what if there isn't someone for them to see, even though you're referring them to care? And that led to the idea that if employers could band together, because they have the power, the purchasing power over insurance companies, because they are the purchasers of insurance and they provide it for their employees. If employers could form a coalition to make sure that insurers cover mental health and serious mental illness care with parity, then people could afford the care because their insurance would make it available. And at the same time, that could build up the network of providers because they're being paid adequately. They don't leave their jobs. More would come to the jobs of mental health care because the payment would be there because the reimbursement is there. So I think that generated a lot of enthusiasm from the group. But do you see that issue of parity being an issue for people to access mental health care in your experience, Andy?
I love that idea, and I've had a chance to be in the room a few times with a bunch of CHROs, Chief Human Resource Officers, and this idea has come up, hey, collectively, we employ 80,000 people. Can we help lead the charge? Because the insurance companies are not going to, unilaterally start reimbursing more. And so I think it's one of those moments where we need the narrative to be, it's actually a good investment for your workforce to be more mentally healthy. And so if we can frame it in a way that isn't just purely appealing to the right thing to do, which by the way is to provide the care, let's also appeal to the idea that it's going to make for a more stable, balanced, productive workforce. And there are some companies leading the charge on this quite well. Microsoft, Salesforce, and there are so many others who are not. So we also have to figure out a way, I think, to apply some societal pressure. Maybe One Mind could come out with the the rankings for the companies that are the best on this dimension, because 90% of corporations I don't think are approaching this issue benevolently or with the idea of putting more dollars to work. So those are some thoughts, but I'm really excited to hear you share that coming up today. Kay, I'm wondering what you're thinking as you hear this conversation about care and reimbursement and all that.
A couple of things. One is I think that the pandemic, one good thing, hopefully, that has come out of it is more open discussion about mental illness, mental health, whatever. And that's because parents have been alone with kids and the kids are not been in school. And so they've been confronted, I think, day to day with the difficulties that children have and adolescents have. So hopefully that will do some things. I mean, I always say whenever I talk to an advocacy group that, this is ultimately a political issue. It's your voters, if you look at what the AIDS community has done and what the breast cancer communities have done in terms of advocating for research. Bipolar illness, for example, is ridiculously lowly funded. But to have the political pressure from voters, and one advantage of having mental illness is that you're one of many, many, many millions. These are not rare diseases. These are diseases, and I think people putting pressure on people. I think that the Obama administration went quite a long ways in terms of parity, in terms of insisting that insurance be at least vaguely equitable. But it's kind of stalled out. It comes and goes. People come and go with their insights, and family members in the Congress. If a congressman or a senator has a child who's got mental illness, then there's a kind of a buzz and flurry of interest, and then it moves on. So, I'm sort of optimistic. I think business could do enormous things because as you say, there are a lot of people, and you can set up models. If Microsoft has a good system, then spread it out and see how it applies across other businesses and what adjustments have to be made. I think it'd be a great thing that the business community could do.
Thank you for raising that, Kay. And at the conference I was just mentioning a moment ago, we introduced a thing called the Mental Health at Work Index, which is a collaboration between One Mind, Columbia University, and the company Ethisphere. And what it's going to do is enable companies to measure how they're doing in caring for the mental health of their employees using a rigorous framework, and then benchmark that against other companies, to the point you raised, Andy, about ranking. But the reason for that is just to be able to see what your areas of improvement can be as a company, and then what you should focus your resources and attention on, and then get recommendations for how to do that. So I'm excited about that innovation that will hopefully change how mental health is practiced in the workplace. But as you say, Kay, I think companies can lead the charge, and may have to be the ones leading the charge to enable people at scale to recover from and live healthily with serious mental illnesses, or even more mild to moderate challenges in the workplace.
Well, I think too, having worked in medical schools all of my professional life, I think that medical schools are just coming around to the idea that a lot of their students and junior faculty and house staff have depression, have bipolar illness, have anxiety. And I think medical schools are beginning to grapple with this. What can you do to make sure that doctors get treated so that they are not impaired, but to make the gradient such that you encourage them to be honest and you encourage them to get treatment within the system instead of discouraging them in terms of making them feel that they have to go to a private practitioner or so forth.
Andy, in your experience as an entrepreneur and a corporate leader, is this the sort of thing that you can envision implementing in companies that you run?
It's really exciting how much more capital and talent is going towards these problems. 5 years ago, I think we had around $100 million of venture capital going into mental health tech last year. And you would probably know the numbers better than me. I hope I'm not making it up, but something like 50 times that. And look, corporations in terms of startups themselves most of them aren't going to be that helpful, right? Any given startup probably isn't going to be that helpful, but with that amount of talent and capital, we're going to see some breakout companies. I think we are. And I've gotten passionate about making angel investments in companies that I think are exciting. There's one, I'll just mention, it's for the family members of folks who are dealing with severe mental illness and creating community for those folks. Brandon, probably, as you know, as all of us know, this wreaks havoc on families well beyond the patient. And so who's there? Thinking of my own mom and all the tortured days and nights, who was there for her? She was so focused on me, who was focused on her? And there's, all kinds of different things I'm seeing coming up. So it comes back to where we began, which is the startups are going to develop some of that innovation, but the larger companies are going to have to be the ones buying it. Right. And so as some of these things break through, and we've seen it a little bit with like Modern Health and Lyra and some others, they're actually starting to be adopted. And, to Kay's point around, hey, let's scale it out. Let's figure out which of these platforms are doing good work. And let's build an ecosystem of mental health technology companies and mental health services companies to provide, for the fact that, to Kay's point, the public sector is in and out of this issue and is, lacking in being able to get things done. The cool thing about it is this, in theory, is a nonpartisan issue.
Exactly.
So in theory, anyway, so I'm optimistic, but I'm wondering, how you're feeling about the trend line on where this is all going.
Well, I think your point about it being nonpartisan is absolutely true. And the, bipolar illness and depression and schizophrenia don't care, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. It just is irrelevant. And so you've seen that's one place in the Congress where you see a kind of meeting across the aisle. And I think there's been, in the last year or two, a real increase in that. But that's always been so. There's been pretty bipartisan. I'm certainly more optimistic than I used to be. I'm on the scientific advisory board of a group that's investing $125 million in the science, the basic science and treatment of bipolar disorder, of coming up with really rigorous science, but getting that information back as quickly as possible to patients and family members. And, it's very exciting to see that being done. And I think there's much more of a tendency now to invest a lot of money in it because the science is better. When you're just investing money into kind of a slush of, ideas and theories and so forth, without the science, there wasn't much enthusiasm.
And the science is getting better every year. New tools for understanding the brain, for understanding people's experiences, and some of those entrepreneurial companies are creating those tools. For example, there are tools for monitoring moods, tools for using, this isn't new, but digital phenotyping, companies that can sense your state of mental well-being or mental illness. I got a dog barking outside my door, pardon me. Through how you use your phone, how you use your wearable device. And this gives me hope that this can supercharge not only care, but also research to improve people's lives. One Mind is part of an international partnership called the Accelerating Medicines Partnership in Schizophrenia, which is an international consortium studying how to develop medications for the very earliest stages of schizophrenia. And it uses wearable devices and smartphone-based monitoring as well to understand biomarkers, like the biological ways to detect if somebody is developing one or another form of psychosis, so that you can dial in the treatment personalized for that type of individual. And so that, I think, it's a new frontier of psychiatry, is precision psychiatry.
Absolutely.
Yeah, what do you think about that, Kay?
Well, I think it's great. Hopkins set up like a couple years ago at Johns Hopkins a precision medicine center for bipolar illness, and it's been very exciting to see. It structures the questions, it organizes cohorts of patients. I mean, I think it's the way of the future. And I think they're at Johns Hopkins, there are probably 15 or 16 of these precision medicine groups across all aspects of medicine, not just psychiatry.
That's wonderful. And that gives a promise that when someone is diagnosed with a serious mental illness like bipolar disorder, that instead of having to try a variety of different treatments over the course of 6 months to a year and to see if one might help, then they could right away get one that works for them, because it fits their biology, it fits their experiences, and they could recover much faster. I mean, that's the ideal, right?
Absolutely. I mean, with antidepressants, people go through this very demoralizing experience of going through 4, 5, 6, 7 antidepressants before they land on one that works. And in the case of lithium, which is still the gold standard for bipolar illness, and particularly in terms of preventing suicide, we know that there's a very strong genetic component in who will respond to lithium. So you would like to be able to save people who are not going to respond to lithium and point them in another direction, but get people on who you think will respond.
Yeah, I'll share it briefly and then I'll throw it to you, Andy. But when I was first diagnosed, it took me like 6 or 7 months to find a medicine that could help quell my psychosis and enable me to go back to school and continue my educational career. But during that 6 months, I was desperate and thinking there'd be no hope, and dealing with the terrible side effects like incontinence, like seizures, like thunder and lightning going on in my head, the feeling of that, and unable to think clearly. It was just such a relief when I found one that actually was able to help me. So precision psychiatry, I think, is a really important advance. But Andy, what was your experience like when you were first diagnosed with finding a treatment that could help you?
Yeah, I rejected the diagnosis the first time. So that didn't go great. And then the second time, it was a little bit analogous to what you said. It took about 6 months for me to get out of the cavernous depression that followed the high of the mania. It was like the sharp high, was met by a very long low. And I couldn't get out of a catatonic depressive state. And so we kept walking through it. And of course, or at least in my case, maybe it's idiosyncratic, the doctor said, we can't give you, a traditional antidepressant because it could slingshot you up into mania. And so we just waited and waited and waited, and eventually got to a place where it was so bad that it was like, okay, we either have to experiment with electroconvulsive therapy or put you on an antidepressant, dial up the mood stabilizer. So it was very hard to get to that right. It took a while. And I think that zone, Brandon, we should talk more about it, because how do you stay on track in that zone where you feel like it's just going to be forever? And I'm so happy that you figured it out. And, I felt so fortunate. I did get on an antidepressant, and I've never been so grateful to anything in my life, getting out of that depression.
It's wonderful to hear. I think there's a lot of questions coming in from the audience as well. Should we maybe turn to some of those, Vicki? What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. We have some very, very good questions here, and I will turn to them right now. But I first want to thank Andy, Kay, Brandon, it's really a privilege to have the opportunity to hear you in conversation and to learn from all of you. Thank you for being trailblazers for mental health and for sharing your personal stories with our audience to raise awareness and to help others. I'm going to start with a question from Catherine about mental health in the workplace. What do you think can be done to help people be able to disclose that they have a mental health diagnosis and symptoms in the workplace without fear of retribution? And I know you mentioned that, Andy, in your book, and Ellen Sachs mentions that in her book. So I wonder if you could speak to that. To disclose or not disclose?
Yeah, well, I think the first step is making sure people are ready to be disclosed to. And so jack.org, which I just learned of through the Born This Way Foundation, Lady Gaga's foundation, has set up a certificate. It's called the Being There Certificate. It's a 30-minute training on how to have a conversation with someone who's disclosing something to you. And I got like every question wrong. So, I had no idea how to do it. I'm the person that does the disclosing normally. So I highly recommend that as a simple step that we can all take to learn how to have that conversation, because most of us are not, Dr. Jameson here, most of us are not trained professionals in how to approach those conversations.
And I think too, that the person who's disclosing has to be at the right point. I mean, I get a lot of questions from residents and interns about when should they disclose and who should they disclose to? And it'd be wonderful to think that the world was going to be widely accepting in medicine. But the fact of the matter is there are a lot of ways you can discriminate against people, and mental illness is right at the top of the list. And so I always advise people to think about it really, really carefully. It doesn't mean you don't disclose, but it does mean you talk about it to a lot of people and look at the legal issues, look at the, just look at every conceivable thing, talk to your family. It's not simple.
No, it's a really tough question to consider. When I was blogging back in the mid-2000s, I had a guest blogger come on who lived with borderline personality disorder, and she had never shared her story publicly before, but she wanted to, inspired by what she was reading in my blog. And she wrote a guest post on my blog, and it was great. I loved what she'd written and had good reception. But about a year later, she contacted me saying that she'd gone in for an interview for a job, and completely out of the blue was rejected. And she was sure that it was due to her employer Googling her and finding her blog post. So it's an example that there is still discrimination in employment, obviously. But the point I want to make is that when you do disclose, I think it's important how you frame it. When I applied for my Master of Science program at UCSF in healthcare administration and interprofessional leadership, I was debating with myself, do I want to let them know that I have schizophrenia when I'm applying for this program? And I decided that I would, because it's so core to why I care about the work that I do. And I framed it as a strength and all that I learned from my experiences with it. And it worked. I was accepted. I got embraced by the program management and did very well in the program. And I have examples of other friends who are a part of this group called the Stability Network, which is a group of working professionals who live with mental health conditions all across the world. And one of those other stability leaders had a similar experience. When she did her performance review, she was open about her her condition, and her team embraced it. Her boss embraced it. So that it can go one way or the other, but I think her framing it as a strength, which we collectively as a group in the Stability Network Advisor could help in that case. It did work in that case.
Another question about what Andy in your company and Brandon in your company, what you are actually doing to support mental illness that arises in an employee. Besides the disclosing, how do you support them?
Yeah, so one thing that that we're about to implement that we've just learned of is this additional reimbursement. So having a stipend for each employee on an annual basis, whether that's, a few $1,000s a year or 5% of their base salary, acknowledging that the reimbursement rates are not there, and that hopefully this corporate / government thing emerges where that improves. In the meanwhile, people need care. And so proactive reimbursement for psychotherapy, other mental health professional services, because the reimbursement rates are so low. Brandon, what are you seeing or what are you doing?
Yeah, Andy, that's great that you support your employees like that. We provide the best insurance benefits that we are able to as a small nonprofit, which are good. And beyond that, we do things that are of low financial cost. We need to preserve our resources as a small nonprofit, but we do things that are of low financial cost, but can benefit employees in other ways. So, for example, we just implemented a new policy of unlimited vacation time. Although it has to be approved by a manager, you do have the option to take vacation time when you need it, as much as you need to manage your well-being. And we're about to start that policy in October, but it's been announced. The team is very grateful for that and enthusiastic about it, which is great to see. We also have a policy of being open, not a policy, but a culture of being open about our experiences, even if they include mental health. I model that as a leader. I'm open and vulnerable about the challenges that I face from day to day. And if I'm tired, I let them know. If I'm stressed, I'm clear about it, which enables others to feel like they can do the same thing. My associates, my team members, when I ask them how they're doing, they're open about it. And I think that gives them a sense of freedom and relief, and support, that they're not alone, that leadership cares about them, which I think matters as well.
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Andy. Okay, we have a lot of questions about medication. Question from Nancy. Do you have any suggestions about how to help people with schizophrenia and or bipolar disorder that are reluctant to take medication? They just plain refuse.
Well, I think that's probably, there are two main clinical problems in treating bipolar illness, and I would schizophrenia as well, a different sort of way. One is getting people into treatment, and the other is keeping people in treatment once they're there. Not taking medications is a very common problem in general, not just in psychiatry, not just with bipolar disorder. Maybe 50% of people with chronic illnesses stop taking their medications. And it's one of those things that is not very well researched. Unfortunately, it's not a kind of a sexy topic to research. I think one of the things that you can do first and foremost is really inform and educate people about the consequences of not taking medication. This early on illness may just sail right over somebody's head. It's very hard to tell somebody who's 18 or 20 years old that they're going to have to be on medication probably for life that has side effects and all sorts of psychological consequences as well as medical consequences. But I think you want to just keep the dialogue open and keep talking with people and encouraging them. My husband's a cardiologist at Johns Hopkins, and he says, you people in psychiatry are always blathering on about how difficult it is to keep people on medication. Try being a cardiologist and get people to stop smoking, to lose weight, to take their statins, to exercise. These are common problems. And I think it's something that in general in medicine, it's just something we have to address much better than we do. But I think asking people, certainly at Hopkins, we ask patients every time we see them, what are they having any second thoughts or concerns about taking medication? If so, what are they? Are the side effects bothering them? What can we do about the side effects? You want to just keep people engaged and treat them like adults, intelligent adults, But it's hard. There's no question it's hard. The two of you all, Andy and Brandon, probably have, obviously, Andy had similar experiences to myself. I stopped taking medication on and off for the first couple of years, disastrously.
Yeah, I did the same thing. About 3 years into my illness, I stopped taking medication, had a terrible relapse, had to resign from my job, go back in the hospital. It took me much longer to recover from the second episode than it did from the first. What helped me to accept that I needed medication probably for the rest of my life at that young stage in my life was a role model. And I read Ellen Saks's book, The Center Cannot Hold: My Journey Through Madness. And she writes in there about accepting that she has a condition that she'll have to manage most likely for the rest of her life, and how that enabled her to stop expending all this internal energy and attention on resisting that diagnosis, and instead move on and do things she cared about in her life, which she's done amazing things, law professor and advocate and great things, and getting married, great things. So I thought when I read that, why don't I try letting my mind go there? It worked for her. And when I went into that space, it's like a weight had been lifted. It's like all of a sudden I could start thinking about other things because I wasn't focused on my illness. Thought about who can I find as a romantic partner? Maybe I can get married, and maybe I can have more friends, and I can enjoy my work and do meaningful work. And within about a year, I joined One Mind as communications director. Before that, I was kind of sitting on the sidelines working for our vineyard only, and met the woman shortly thereafter who's now my wife. We've been married for 13 years, and it gets better every year. And I'm glad that I accepted that I have this condition that needs medication, as well as other factors. But I'm very glad that I accepted it.
Thank you. Question for Andy, which I just lost my place, so I may have to get back to it. Okay, question from Sally. We'll go to this one. About your comment about children and their mental health challenges. What tips do you have for parents seeking pediatric care for their children? She goes on to say she's been on waiting lists for years, and then once seen, it's not the best provider, best match for her child. Can you comment on that or give some suggestions on how, even for adults, how to get care, how to seek out the best psychiatrist or psychologist or mental health professional that is a good fit?
Okay, can I pass that to you?
Yes, for a very short answer. I mean, the number of child psychiatrists and adolescent psychiatrists is abysmally low. And this is, again, I think when society figures out that we have a real problem here, that will change. But at the moment, the waiting lists everywhere are long. And one of the results of that is that because the waiting lists are so long, people don't have to take insurance. So much of the care that goes to children and to adolescents and adults, for that matter, in terms of psychiatrists and clinical psychologists, is people just say, I'm not going to take insurance because they can't. And, so this just ratchets up the level of disparity to, a staggering level.
That's kind of a sad comment on our healthcare system right now, isn't it? Thank you, Kay. We have a shout out to you, Kay, from an old friend from Pally High. Susan says, hello to Kay, quite a journey since Pally High in European history. Susan is the author of Natural Genius, The Gifts of Asperger's Syndrome. Susan, I'm going to mispronounce the last name, but Rubinyi, Rubinyi.
Hello. Nice to hear from somebody from Palisades High.
Yeah. Question from Steve. Do you have any thoughts about the relationship between manic episodes, minor or otherwise, and advertising that encourages people to have no fear, you can do anything. In general, the media, how does it contribute? The messages, and especially social media, contribute? Anyone?
Brandon, you're up.
Oh, well, sure. I've not been manic, but do you want to take that, Andy? I mean, you're a role model, and
Well, yeah, I can take it on the mania front. I thought you might have something more wise to say on social media and advertising. I mean, look, I think phones are a problem. For me, they're still a problem in terms of the connection to sleep. And sleep, at least speaking for myself, is so foundational to mental health. I send a sleep report every morning. The first thing I do before I brush my teeth, even before I take my mood stabilizer of choice, which I won't tell you what it is because I love it too much. And it's our nanny accused me of taking money from a pharmaceutical company after she read my book. I send a screenshot of my Fitbit sleep report to my doctor, my mom, my wife, and my sister, who are in a shared WhatsApp group. And the reason that I do that is because it's so tied for me as sleep is going down, mania is going up. Mood is elevating. And on the flip side, if I'm sleeping a lot, that means I'm moving towards a depressive state. So we have a lot of smartphone hygiene to work on, particularly at night. You got to start acting sleepy by about 8 or 9 p.m. And I don't know about UK, but for me in my manic state, I had so many cultural references coming out. It was like I was living out every scene of every movie or TV show. There was some connection. So I think the question, Steve, is so astute. And I don't have a good answer for you other than to say I think collectively have a lot of work to do to figure out how to get off these phones more, and how to get our children off the phone. One quick additional note on that, I converted to Judaism in 2017, which was very grounding for me. I grew up as the son of a Hindu and a Christian, and I was very confused about who God was. And so at some point I decided it must be me, which was what happened during my first manic episode. And one of the things about converting that has been great is for Shabbat, I attempt to have 24 hours off my phone. And it's amazing how hard it is to do just one day a week. So that's what I'd share, Steve. Kay, I didn't know if you had any thoughts on mania and advertising and social media.
I don't do social media at all. I just figure it's just not something I want to go down doing. So that's not been an issue. Certainly sleep is clearly related to, it's both a symptom of mania and the lack of it exacerbates mania. So we know that, I mean, if I'm talking to college students about bipolar illness, I say, there are a couple of things you can do. One is you can take your medication. The other is really regulate your sleep. Now, telling an 18-year-old at college to regulate their sleep is, you could try. It doesn't necessarily work. But I think it's very important for people to realize that link, that's a hugely important link, hugely important.
You are both so wise. Sleep is something that is so undervalued in our society. I read a book called American Mania by a UCLA psychiatrist, Dr. Peter Wybrow, a few years ago, and just changed my perspective on the importance of self-care and how sleep is so important. And one thing that keeps me up at night is this like ethos that you mentioned, whoever made that question, that you relayed, Vicki, that we should always be doing more. Like we should always be not let fear hold us back. We should try to maximize our productivity, try to maximize our experiences. I think that is misleading. I think that being here in the moment right now is incredibly valuable. And just being able to not think about I've got to do more, I've got to do more, I've got to do more, but just to be here is incredibly refreshing. And it's great to be here right now with you, Andy, and UK, and you, Vicki, and all you as well who are here with us today on the show. So appreciate everything.
Yes, thank you. And read Andy's books. It's really interesting and it's really thoughtful and it's very well written.
It is very well written. I highly recommend it as well. I want to thank the three of you. This has been a fascinating conversation, and thank you for the privilege of learning from you. Andy, thank you for the gift of your book. And Kay, your unquiet mind has inspired so many people and helped so many people. So thank you for that. Brandon, thank you for all the work that you do to help people with mental illness. We are so grateful to all of you. And for all of you that tuned in today, thank you. We look forward to seeing you. Our next Open Mind program is next week on September 22nd. We will have Diane Shader-Smith with us, who will talk about memoir and documentary film Salt in My Soul, An Unfinished Life, which is based on the secret diary of her daughter who died at the age of 26 from cystic fibrosis, her inner thoughts, her mental health challenges. And Dr. Brenda Birch, who is a medical psychologist and professor at UCLA in both psychiatry and pediatrics, will also join us. So thank you. Thank you for your work. Thank you for all you do. And thank you for being part of our Open Mind. Good night, everyone.
Night.